Today on this special episode of the Highlands podcast, I'm joined by a very special guest, Pastor Jonathan Edwards. He is the director of Daybreak Leadership College in Carlsbad, California. And I can't wait to have this conversation with you on serving the next generation. And so, Pastor Jonathan, thank you for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just introduce you to our podcast audience.
Yeah, I'm a recovering pastor's kid, missionary kid. I say that somewhat jokingly, but more of, I'd spent a lot of time in ministry. My parents were missionaries in Latin America. So I grew up in Panama and Venezuela, 11 years of my life. And then we moved to the U.S. when I was 11. And then my parents pastored Hispanic churches for about 27 years. And so I had this kind of multicultural experience. I'm what you call a third culture kid. And so I grew up in a missionary family home, pastor's kid home, but fourth generation in ministry. Went to Life Pacific University, started off in ministry, and I've done everything from next gen stuff to most recently, prior to the current role I'm in right now, I was an executive pastor in Santa Clarita, California for 21 years. And then 2.5 years ago, came down to a very rough place to do ministry on the coast, 30 minutes north of San Diego in Carlsbad, California. So I have the awesome privilege of being the director of a college, an immersive college experience for those who are called to ministry at Daybreak Church called Daybreak Leadership College.
Yeah, where you're located, I'm not sure that God is fair. You know, everywhere I look is just desert and brown. We were at Carlsbad recently. Everywhere you look in Carlsbad, just water and like green, blue, like it's beautiful down there. And so you are suffering for Jesus in Carlsbad. So.
I get no sympathy. Trust me. If I ever state, this is where I'm serving, people go, oh, okay, I see.
Right. That's so funny. So what drew you to this new opportunity? Obviously the place, but even more than that, what was about the ministry assignment that drew you to Daybreak?
What drew me here was several different things. You know, having, as I just mentioned very quickly, my experience, not just as an individual being a part of a ministry family, but also having done ministry and been a part of ministry for years. One of the things that along the way that was particularly of interest to me is not just there's a good and better way to do things, but there's also are ways to not do it. And so I've always been very passionate on a critical thinking level of like, what does healthy ministry look like? What do healthy ministers look like? And I think that that's always been a part of my own personal conviction / calling. And so when the opportunity presented itself to partner with young adults who are between the ages of 18 and 25, who are wrestling with a call to ministry, I jumped at the chance because, man, I call it pre-covery versus recovery. You know, instead of working with students who are kind of fixing things later on in life or people in ministry, what if you could connect with them at a formative time to do all the wrestling? And what if you could talk about what it means to not only pursue God's calling, but do it in a healthy way where there's vibrancy and longevity? And so, man, this is like not just my wheelhouse, but like a love. And so when the door opened, I was like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah. I love that because you were executive pastor previously, kind of serving the needs of multi-generations of the whole church. Correct. Now you're kind of zeroing in on the next generation, really probably Gen Z more. What are some needs? You work with them uniquely each day in, day out. What are some needs of this generation that you're seeing that parents and pastors, church leaders need to be aware of?
I love that question, especially because it asks the question. You know, I think sometimes we get so busy doing what has always been done and sometimes pausing and reflecting on, okay, wait, why are we doing this? I would say that the emerging generation, something that I feel like is a core, both a challenge and an opportunity, is I think that young people today are really wrestling with authenticity. I think we're in a culture that has encouraged kind of this veneer living. You know, social media has made this upcoming generation very good at personal brand management. They're really good at front-facing reality of like, I want the world to know me by this look, this feel, and I'm going to garnish attention and likes and a sense of my own value by how the world perceives the brand that I'm selling to them or putting out to them.
Yeah.
And even though there is this dopamine hit that happens when someone likes them, it potentially is an imposter reality. And I think at a deep core, the current generation is saying, I want to be me, but if I showed the world the real me, would they really like me? And so I think there's this element, we're image bearers, we're made in God's image. There's this element of not only wanting to know, but be known, ultimately with our Savior and with God. But we also want that on a, not just vertical level, but a horizontal level with other people. But the world's got it wrong. And I think so deep down inside, I think this current generation, there is this element where they're going, you know what? I want to be seen. Do people see me, the real me? Am I valued for my own intrinsic value of who I am fundamentally, not just what I could be or a brand that I'm looking to put out there? I also think that the current generation really wants to be engaged with. I talked about wanting to be seen. Like, are people willing to engage with me, to hear my story, to understand who I am, what I'm excited about? Like, are they willing to sit down and have a conversation with me? Are they willing to be involved? Would they invite me into their world? So I think the emerging generation is looking at former generations and saying, hey, can I sit at the big person's table? Thinking back to when I was growing up, you're at the kid table, this need, I think, to go, hey, can I sit at the big people's table? And I think churches and ministries, if they could say, hey, you're not only seen, but you have value and you have something, a story worth telling. And it's not for a later date, but right now, would you come and sit? And I want to hear from you and I want to get something from you. And then in return, there's going to be a reciprocal thing happening. So I think there's tons that this generation is facing, but I feel like on a core level, that element, that story to tell and be seen and heard and valued is just huge.
That's so good. Yeah, you read in the book of Titus and First Timothy, Paul's telling Timothy to older men to train the younger men and older ladies to teach the younger ladies. But I don't think it's just necessarily about imparting information. Paul makes room for those young leaders. And so how have you kind of seen that of making room for young leaders? And, like you said, in the days of YouTubers, influencers, trying to get more likes, more follows, whatever, there are very hungry, spiritually hungry young adults. So how are you able to make room for them?
Well, first off, I would say if anyone is genuinely passionate and dedicated to doing just that, it's just very, very messy. First, it's not going to be a very sterile, clean thing. I think intergenerational connection, bridge building, it's complicated. But for those who are willing to do it, I would say what it's usually most powerful when an older generation is willing to initiate it and able to say, hey, come be a part of this thing. I know here within the context of Daybreak Church, where I get to be able to do ministry, a lot of it is creating just really open doors for involvement and participation. And I think it takes a level of proactivity that says, you know what, I'm going to have an open door. I'm going to go chase down the next generation. I'm going to say, hey, I notice you have a skill. I see this in you. I'm going to call that out like, hey, come be a part of this thing, not making it hard to do, not putting it on this pedestal way up there. Or, once you're really good at this or really polished, you can then maybe get a chance. It's no, I want you now. And so one of the things we do around here quite frequently, in fact, if I'm honest, and frank, when I first got here, I thought, oh man, they make it so easy around here to get involved in ministry. But one of the things that it really showed me was we have to make it easy. Yeah. We have to make it easy. And we can't just talk the talk. We have to have systems and processes and behaviors that are not only self-evident, but reproducible so that we can create a culture of like, hey, we want you. Come be a part of this thing. Come to the table. I want to hear what you have to say, but also jump in. It's going to be messy. It's not going to be done perfect, but guess what? It's going to expand because when you get it to be a part of this thing, there's a multiplication thing that happens.
Yeah, that's so good. I love what you're saying, that it is messy. And I think sometimes, so next year will be the 25th anniversary of when I graduated from high school, which I feel ancient when I say that. But having said that, when I think back to when I was 18, 19, 20, there were men and women that were patient with me. And so it is messy, but I think the older men have to be patient. The older ladies have to be patient. And parents, youth pastors, leaders have to be patient because they're trying to figure it out. And What were you like when you were 21, when you were 22? You didn't have life figured out. Often I was a knucklehead, when I was that age. And so people kind of helping me and being patient and allowing the messiness of kind of growing and gifting, I think is really important. And I think that's what you do well at Daybreak Leadership College, we'll talk about in a moment, I think does really well about allowing almost like this experimenting of practice of what this looks like in real life and taking the learning off of the pages of the book and into real life. And so we'll talk about DLC in a moment, but are you seeing a renewed spiritual hunger in this next generation?
Absolutely. I think it even goes back to what I referenced earlier in this veneer culture where everything is, influencers and a brand and, there's an attractional element to everything. I think young people today are dying for things that are just real. I'm not saying that the stuff, churches even now, we use a lot of technology and we use LED walls and we have amazing, music and we do podcasting, all these things. I love the tools, but ultimately at the end of the day, the tool serves people, not the reverse. And I think what happens is people today go, you know what? Are you going to give me something real? Like everything around me feels like a dopamine hit. Whether it be the push notifications on my phone or the algorithms, I think people literally the noise and the things that are pulling them, it leaves them wanting and really kind of, asking the question like, is this for real or is this just hype? And every time I get around young people today, they're like, I want to get past the hype. Now, here's the thing. Hype isn't fundamentally bad. And I've heard a phrase used a few years ago. It's like, whatever you win them with is what you win them to. Right. If you win people with hype and it's only sustained by hype, it's the bottom falls out. But I think the hunger of young people today is, I want something that's real. And can you just be real with me? Can you just level with me? And that there's a God, out there who cares about them. Can you get into the mire of my existence and just shoot me straight? Don't give me a line. Don't give me, your latest, coined phrase. Like, I just want to know that there's a God who's willing to enter into the mess, past the veneer and enter into my story. And I think that there's quaking that's happening in young people. And I think that they're going, you know what? There's got to be more to this, out there. And so I think it's an amazing time to do ministry, but I think young people today are wrestling with that. And it's largely in part by the veneer that they are constantly dealing with.
Yeah, that's so good. And we're seeing that here as well in our community, just almost these like spontaneous worship nights that are popping up all over in backyards or at parks. Yeah. In fact, just before we recorded today, my daughter called me, Dad, there's a worship night tonight, can I go? And I'm like, what parent doesn't want their kid to go to a worship night, and just kind of talking about that. And like, they're just worshiping the Lord. And it's really cool to see how this, and I think you're right, of just authenticity of, I want something real. And who is more real than following Jesus, than going back to scripture and even without the cool lights or the haze or all the stuff that we kind of invest in or want to have in our services, they're just like, just give me Jesus, like I just want to focus on him and worship him. I love that. I want to zero in specifically for this next part of parents. We have a lot of parents in our church who are parenting teenagers, seniors now or seniors to be. And so this idea of college is coming, which we'll talk about in a moment, but also adulthood, even more broadly.
Yeah.
And so how would you encourage parents specifically to help their student, their teenager, to continue in following Jesus after they leave the house, the nest, the time with them, whatever you want to call it? What are some things we could do now as parents to help our kids continue to follow Jesus?
Sure. I love this question. And just, by way of understanding, I'm not only involved with doing ministry amongst young adults, but I also have 2 young adult daughters who not only grew up in my home, but also went off to college. And recently in the last 10 months, both of them got married. So I've seen different seasons. And so, thank you. But I've even wrestled with this on an experiential level as a dad. So not just as a practitioner doing ministry in this space, but I love this question. And I think, as I've wrestled with this, because I get this question quite frequently, I think there's this tendency as parents, and this is particularly a good thing when kids are young. We want them to do the right thing.
Right.
And so what we tend to do is we tend to move towards what I would call compliance. Hey, please don't do that. Don't touch that. You're going to get burned. Don't walk out into the street. You're going to get hit by a car. Things are pretty black and white. And it's very like, you want them to survive. You want them to live, but there's this element of like, let me tell you what's right and wrong. And I'm going to be very explicit about that. Mm. That is great up to a point.
Sure.
The problem is when if their entire paradigm of how they've wrestled with who they are and what is right and wrong is simply been done on a compliance level, later on, when they leave the home, it will fall apart. What I believe we ultimately want is we don't want children who are compliant. We want them to have their own convictions.
That's good.
We want them to have the answer for the why for themselves. Like in my home, my last name is Edwards, right? And it's a classic parent line. We Edwards don't do this, insert your family name, right?
Sure.
Which is a great statement, but it's an ineffective statement as it extends into the future, because at the end of the day, I don't want my children making a decision based on a compliance to a family name. What I want them to have is discernment. So I would submit the answer to your question actually begins far earlier than when they actually go off to college. It's all along the way is can we engage our kids to begin to express and own the why behind the what?
That's good.
We don't just go to church because that's what Christians do. It's like, well, why do we go to church? It's having spiritual conversations. Like, why do we go to church? So why do we do that? And it's not so that we can be annoying to our kids. Like, why? But we want them to become critical thinkers. Right. We want them to wrestle. We want them to go, why do we go to church? Why do we go once a week? Why do we do worship songs? Why should we worship? Why should we read scripture? Right. And when we begin to engage that curiosity, but also that appropriate level of questioning, they begin to formulate their own convictions. And when a young person then is asked the question, so why do you do that? They don't say, well, my parents don't let me. Right. They say, I don't want to do that because it's not good for me. And I would say that now as they begin to head into their teenage years and they look to step into their own mission, if you will, their own design, what God has for them, they're now engaging it as someone who has the ability to discern what is good and right, and out of their own personal conviction, the ownership of their own faith, rather than this element of like, well, what would mom and dad say? And so when you apply it to like the college question, it's now not a question of just, what would my mom and dad want me to do? Or what would be the college that everybody wants me to go to? They begin to ask the deeper questions of like, is that a good school for me? Would I follow Christ if I went there? What's God made me to be? Okay, what's my calling? What's my shape? What? And so they're already engaging the deeper questions that ultimately I think will serve them better as they step into that future. And a parent doesn't then have to be there, guiding them with every step. Rather, they can say with confidence, you know what? I've helped my young person fall in love with Jesus, and they've developed discernment, and they own their own faith, and they have their own convictions. And you know what? They're going to stumble, but they're going to be all right, because it's not about being compliant to me. It's not about rules. It's about a deeper thing called, hey, this is mine. I own my faith. This is my personal conviction. And I think that that's just a really critical piece in stepping into futures.
I love that. That's so good. And that's gold for parents, because so often when our kids are young, we focus on that behavior modification. We just want them to do right, not do wrong, and we want to teach them. And that's good. I was talking to a parent at a service recently, how their kids are still in that age group where their world revolves around their parents. So they don't go anywhere without their parents, and
so
I
easy.
miss those days, like I want my girls to revolve around me. I want to be their world, but they're older now, and now they have friends, and my oldest is driving, and they're setting their schedule, and they got practices, and life is just changing. And so there's some points of parenting that I've learned recently that I have to rely on, first of all, the Lord, and we believe that his influence on their life is going to guide them, but also depend on what I've already taught them. And it's kind of too late to go back and do some things that maybe when they were 5 or 6 that I could have done. And so it's just trusting that God is keeping them and taking care of them, and that he'll bless what, that's why we read in Proverbs, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. And so you deposit as much truth as you can, and believe that that word will not return void. And so I love what you're saying, Jonathan. And I want to kind of pivot now to really your ministry assignment, which is Daybreak Leadership College. The concept of a Bible college is foreign to a lot of parents in our church who didn't grow up in a church or got saved later in life. And so this idea of going to a college specifically to train pastors, ministers, leaders, etc., would be foreign. So could you share the heart behind Daybreak Leadership College and almost give us this broad view of what the purpose is and even why a parent should send their kid to Daybreak?
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's an important question. At the very heart of what we do at Daybreak Leadership College, DLC for short, what we do at DLC, or I would say is the foundation for what we do. There's a really well-known passage in Ephesians 2:10, and it says, we're God's masterpiece, created anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good works he planned for us long ago. So just in that scripture right there, there's this recognition that each one of us is a masterpiece. We're one of a kind. Like we have a very distinct design in God's eyes and also in his plans, and when we're made anew in him and he begins to reveal and refine us and develop us, he wants us to live out the plans he planned, and designed for us to live out. And so at the very heart of what we do is this element of, we believe there are certain students out there, certain individuals who have sensed God saying, you know what, I've got something for you. And I believe it's in the area of ministry. And ministry could be in the marketplace. It could be parachurch. It could be within a church. It could be, you name it. We can take ministry into virtually any area. But people who say, I believe that that's actually a major theme of my life. I'm supposed to be on mission for God. So for those individuals who've said, I've got a call, what we have sought to be as an extension of Life Pacific University, we're a satellite campus and location where students can take that calling, and they may have a lot of detail as it relates to that calling, or they may be going, you know what, I know I'm called, but I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. And what they're able to do is pursue, an education on a collegiate level. They can obtain a bachelor's degree or an associate of arts degree. We have several different ones to choose from that are fully accredited through Life Pacific University, but they're able to not only do that degree completion, but also do that immersed within the context of a church. So they're not just getting the head knowledge. They're not just getting smarter. They're becoming more wiser and how they apply that knowledge because they are immersed within a culture doing ministry. So instead of just hearing about ministry for some later date out there, they're able to go, okay, I'm learning, but I'm also applying. And so what they do is our students, they choose a degree that they want to pursue. And then we have an array of 7 different areas of ministry that they can immerse themselves in. That ranges from next gen ministry, whether that be kids or youth ministry. Right. They can also choose what we call creative arts, which can include design and media. It can be production, worship ministries, the stuff that people tend to think of, music and the like. We can also do pastoral leadership or organizational leadership. They choose an area that they want to be immersed in. And so they do the degree, they get immersed and they get coached and mentored specifically in ministry environments so that they're able to literally get their hands in the soil, get at it, and learn a lot about themselves. But ultimately, it kind of goes back to that scripture where they begin to go, oh, this is what I was made for. And it wasn't just put off to, once I graduate, I'll eventually get to that. They're able to get in there and do it week after week.
That's right.
And so that's what Daybreak Leadership College is. It's an environment to get a degree, pursue ministry, but begin doing ministry now in a hands-on ministry fashion within a culture that's healthy, and allow God to then to further curate and develop them so that they're ready to launch out and ultimately begin to pursue and chase after the vision God has for their life in terms of ministry.
I love that so much. And we're just on a personal note, we're kind of growing through this. My oldest daughter has been praying about, we've looked at different colleges. We've actually visited you there at DLC. Yeah. And one of the things that stood out about DLC from maybe other colleges is that, or maybe a traditional style of college, is that often, we'll send our kids to college and then they'll just sit in a classroom for 4 years, learn all about the subject, don't do anything about it. And then 4 years later, we're like, all right, go be an expert, go get a job in that field. But what the difference is, and what I think even my daughter and even I as a pastor has really appreciated about your approach, is that you're not just teaching the knowledge, but you're actually they're going to be in staff meetings and department meetings. They're going to be doing ministry in the weekend. I was even telling Avery, her plans. And I'm like, well, you got to come home and see me on the weekends. And she's like, I can't, I'll be doing ministry. I'll be serving. I'm going to be busy, Dad. I'm like, well, then I'm going to come see you. And I'm going to, Dad, let me know before you come. And I'm like, no, I don't need to. I'm just going to drop in. And, it's just this idea that she is excited. And I think the approach that DLC has of you're training up and you're giving the accredited degree, which is important. You're giving the information, but pairing that with a practical hands-on. It's almost more of a, I don't know if this is fair to say or categorize, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhat of a hybrid where you're like learning for sure, but you're also able to put some hands to that and figure it out. And what I've appreciated about the Daybreak Leadership College, either from you and also Pastor Jason Graves, is just this hands-on approach to allowing these students to, like you said, kind of get messy in ministry, but also learn. And again, you're there and you're providing some guardrails, but they're not taking what they learn and 4 years later putting into practice. They're able to take what they're learning, put into practice like that weekend and figuring out what does that look like in ministry. So I love that approach.
Yeah. And you know what, if I were to throw something out to parents who are talking to their student and wrestling with what next steps are, I think two things are worthy of note. Culture matters. Whatever you surround yourself with, you will become. And one of the things that we have sought to do here is curate a culture, a habitat, if you will, that if you're going to be immersed in something, you're going to be going to staff meetings, but you're going to be around people who are not only doing what you want to do in the future, possibly, but they're good people.
Yeah.
They love Jesus. They love people. Right. They have good work-life balance. They have, they're leaning into their mental health. They're, working on their marriages. It's they're part of a culture that is also working on authenticity. And so, there are lots of places you can go out there to get an education, but whether, it's via secular institution or a Christian institution, I strongly recommend that a family really wrestle with what is the culture that you'll be stepping into. And I know that that's something that we have really baked into what we do here. But the second piece would be, and I don't know what your experience was like, Jeremy, but this is the case for lots of folks out there. College and that young adulthood isn't just about figuring out who you are. It's also figuring out who you're not.
That's right.
I would say it's the difference between a Christmas tree and a bonsai tree. A Christmas tree, you throw the ornaments on it and you decorate it to adorn it to make it beautiful. If you talk to anybody who's into bonsai trees, and I don't mean to get all geeky on you here, but if you talk to anybody who's into bonsai trees, they'll tell you the way they'll even use this kind of like guru kind of phrasing to it. They'll say the way you reveal the beauty of a bonsai tree is the cutting away to reveal the beauty. That's right. And I think the young adult experience is not only getting after what you want to be, but it's also allowing God to cut away, to reveal to you like, oh, I thought that was me, but that's not me. Whether that be sin or even just points of interest. I like the idea of said career or said ministry. But once I got my hands into it, I'm realizing I don't think this is me. And here's the other really big part. You also surrounded by a culture of people who are helping you be objective. Do you have good self-awareness? Yeah. Do you see yourself accurately? Are you making good choices? And when you have a community that's dedicated to authenticity and objectivity and it's safe and they're cheering you on, oh my gosh, that's a big deal. So those are just some nuggets that I throw out to parents as points of consideration.
That's so good. And I want you to give a word to young adults in a moment, but let's kind of continue on that track for parents because maybe they send their student off to Daybreak Leadership College, or maybe they're going to secular college or college out of state. You've sent your daughter's off to college. So give us some practical tips to parents who are sending their kids off to college for the very first time.
Wow, man, there's so many layers to all of that. If there were a couple things maybe worth considering that I would submit would be, first, the awareness that God cares about your kiddo, your child more than you do. And he is sovereign and he's got them on a journey. And so hold loosely, don't just turn them loose. Earlier on in the conversation, I was talking about the fact that we want to be people of engagement and we want our kids to be people of conviction, and to own the why behind the what. And that happens through conversation. I think if you can, trust that God has got them, but also stay close enough where you have conversation to be a part of their life, where you're asking questions. How's that going? Not looking over their shoulder like, hey, did you get this done? Did you get that done? You know, it's not about, again, the compliance thing, but asking questions like, hey, how are you doing with God? How's he doing in your life? Creating cadences and rhythms with them where you're just checking in with them, not to check on them, but checking in and going, how are you feeling? How are you doing? What's God been saying to you?
That's good.
What are you loving right now? What are you wrestling with? And I think that, earlier on, I mentioned that we're always moving for compliance when they're young. When they become teenagers, we kind of move into more of a coaching role with them.
Okay.
But when we're young adults, we're more consultants. They're going to, respect when your kids invite you in. Like, hey, mom and dad, what do you think about this? And see those as sacred, God-given moments to go, hey, wow, thanks for letting me be involved. And I think it's just discerning, the Holy Spirit has to guide. But I would say trust that God's got them, but also develop cadences and rhythms where you're allowing them not only be seen, but allowing them and trusting that God has got them in the process, but checking in with them to dialogue like, what are you seeing? What are you doing? Giving them the opportunity to have someone listen to them and take it in and know that you're not there to just parent on them. I think that's a one thing I'd recommend. The other thing is man, there's just so many layers to all of this, particularly if they're local or not local. I just, before you take something to them, take it to God first.
Okay.
Be a person of prayer. I am amazed how much I'm concerned with, and those concerns move to worry. I have all kinds of ideas what I think could be happening, and oh my gosh, what if they go off and do this or that and the other? And it's like, okay, Lord, before I take this to them, I'm going to take this to you. And I'm going to allow that rhythm to create not only a rhythm where I'm interceding for my own kids, my own children, but I'm also developing a rhythm of connecting with God on their behalf. And ultimately then if and when I'm then able to take that to them, it's been shrouded in prayer and there's something more God-led. Because I think there's a natural tendency, I'll just speak for myself as a parent, you never stop being concerned and worried and what about this and that? And, I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase. It's easy to be what they call a lawnmower parent. You want to go out in front of them and cut down all the obstacles and kind of pave the way for them. And you can't do that. That's got to be God's job. And so it feels terrifying, frankly, but I believe God replaces that fear with peace when we first take things to him first before we take it to our children. And I know these are very ethereal and very spiritual, the things I've thrown out to you, but
so good.
Man, I think those are pivotal foundational elements to consider.
Those are so good, Jonathan. That's gold for parents. Any parent that has a kid in college, going to college, those are some really good tips to consider. We've been focusing a lot on parents, but I want to wrap up our conversation with a word to young adults. We have a lot of not just seniors, but also young adults in our church who are discerning God's call of ministry on their life, and they're thinking about next steps, and they're thinking about what does God want me to do to further my training, to go to explore his giftings on my life, his calling. Yeah. So how would you maybe advice or thoughts, both what DLC offers, but also in general, how would you counsel those young adults as they are figuring out God's call of ministry on their life? Yeah.
Wow. It's such an important question to ask, because I think that we all know that the enemy doesn't want us to fulfill and be who God's called us to be. But I think in particular for those who have a call to ministry, I think the enemy would love to see them experience a failure to launch and snuff that out and keep that from, growing, to take that spark and eliminate it. But some things to consider, first I would say to a parent who maybe hears their child express that. I have lots of parents that will connect with me and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do with it. I had a trajectory in mind of what I wanted them to do, to go to business school or to go do this and that, and to be affluent and to be successful. And this ministry thing sounds really weird. Can you actually make a living doing that? I sit across the table from parents who are genuinely concerned. They're like, okay. They're almost like, all right, convince me this is like a viable pathway. Right. Sure. So I would say to that is that first, God's got them, but a call to ministry is a beautiful calling. It's definitely a niche, and it's definitely a little bit outside the box, but it is true and it is viable. But I would say as a parent, if you cannot quickly snuff that out, like pause and go, okay, what do you think that looks like? First is to validate and affirm that calling and not just kind of dismiss it outright. If you can almost put your agenda to the side for a little bit, what you thought they were going to do, and maybe you're like, okay, this is new. Okay, how do I? So first, take it in and listen, affirm and encourage. And if it's truly a calling of God, it will grow and develop from there. You don't have to like freak out about it. But once you kind of get past maybe the shock, and maybe there are parents out there who are like, oh, no, I'm totally on board. Okay, maybe that doesn't apply to you. But here maybe are some good things then to take from that moment of inception. You know, if you're going to pursue calling, I mentioned earlier culture. I think the culture of your church that you're currently a part of, the question mark of, hey, can that calling be nurtured? You know, start serving now, get involved in ministry. You know, ministry is not this thing out there. It's now, it's something that all believers are called to. So for them to then look at for practical things, they can begin to already nurture what they feel that lane is or their own giftings are. I would say explore what those gifts are. Then if you're thinking about what could be next, let's just use the higher education element as an example. If a student's like, man, I really want to pursue this, but I want to maybe get some education and some experience, there are several things that I think a parent should absolutely wrestle with alongside their student. You know, don't do this research on their behalf. Right. Call them up and have them own this journey, and maybe do that in partnership. But begin to do research out there. But here are some really important things. Let's say they want to pursue a Christian environment. And we talked about culture earlier. When you're out there looking for Christian colleges, here's something really important to look at. Is it a Christian college in name only? You know, they have a history of being Christian, or how Christian are they? And here are some tells that are very important. Ask the question, does the faculty and the administration have to sign a statement of faith? If they do, probably it's going to have a certain measure of a Christian culture that is more pronounced if the opposite were true. Right. The other question to ask is, how about the students? Are the students asked to sign a statement of faith, meaning to affirm that they have a Christian faith? That's another big game changer. So if you can imagine, these are all nuances. These are all on the spectrum. If you have, you know, administration and staff that are affirming that they are Christian, and then you have students who are going there also affirming they're Christian, it's probably going to be a lot more Christian than just the institution who says they have a Christian origin, meaning the culture of what's happening there is going to really be one that expresses Christ. So that would be a really big thing to look at. The other thing is, if you're going to pursue ministry, this is a really, 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 really big one. We have students who just very quickly go online and do research, and they see an amazing Christian college, but they don't realize that they're going to an institution that's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $50,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And if you do the math, they spend 2 or 4 years, they could potentially walk away with conceivably hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Right. And I can tell you, ministry is an amazing calling, but it tends to not be lucrative. And I've watched students who just jump into a program that costs a fortune. And what they don't realize they're doing is they're literally shackling themselves with debt. And when they graduate, they have the inability to step into the calling that they want to pursue because they have this mountain of debt. And they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? And now they're having to go to employers or churches or ministries. And they're like, yeah, I want to get hired, but I need to make this much because I've got all this debt back here. And what they didn't realize, that decision they made 4 years back is now a shackle or a huge weight on their back. And I would submit it's not a weight that's necessary. I mean, I know for DLC, and I do not mean this to be a commercial, but I know for our program, one of the things we sought to do is how can we do it as inexpensive as possible? So like in our program, it's $15,000 a year, including housing. And if a student works part-time, they could potentially do it debt-free. We've subsidized it so that we can keep it low, because I believe one of the greatest things that takes students out of ministry is that they have tons of debt. And so in order to pay off debt, they then begin to work other jobs and other things. And later on, that calling becomes more dim and more and more dim. And later on, I've actually sat across the table from people who are in ministry, or I should say who are not in ministry, and have said, you know what? I had a call way back then. And truth be told, I just got into debt and then I started making money. And here I am. I'm now 40, 50 years old. And I wish I would have been more proactive to pursue that. And I think a really practical way is you don't have to get into a ton of debt. You want to get educated. You possibly get a credential like a degree, but pursue a culture, pursue a context that's going to empower you. And that's a really important word. It's going to empower you and give you the ability to be literally catapulted into ministry and in the calling you have, and not hinder you because of things like debt. So those are just a couple nuggets that I would throw out there, but they're kind of a big deal as one is wrestling with that. Maybe if I threw a third one in there, is go somewhere where you're not just going to be learning. You know, it's not just a head thing. It's a hands and heart thing where you're implementing it and doing it. And one of the tough things about Christian universities out there is you might go to that university, but then there's a question of, are there healthy ministries to plug into around there, whether it be at the school or in the local, area. And back in the day when I went to Bible college, I had to be super proactive and search out that church. And thank God I was able to find it, but that's not always the case. And I think while you're in college, you want to be plugged into something that is healthy and vibrant so that you can not only learn the stuff, the intelligent stuff, but you also want to be a part of the experiential stuff that's just as healthy and just as empowering and just as enriching, that will complement that learning and ultimately give you some best practices to then live out going forward.
That's so good. Well, Jonathan, I want you to know here at the Highlands, we're big fans of Daybreak Leadership College, Daybreak Church, and if you're part of the Highlands and you've never been to Daybreak, I would describe Daybreak as very similar to the Highlands, just in a beach setting. There's a vibrancy and energy there that they have, but the desert's also beautiful, and God's doing some great things here in the desert, but people getting baptized there at Daybreak, there's a hunger for the Lord, for the Spirit to move. And so there's a lot of similarities between the churches. And, I'm about to send my oldest daughter to DLC. And so I firmly believe in, support the ministry there, the college there. And we're just so grateful for all that you're doing there. We're going to pull you away from the beach for a Sunday to come up to the desert to visit us and share a little bit about the ministry here at the church and also in our high school students. But we're so grateful for all that you're doing. And thank you for being part of this conversation and really sharing some incredible instruction and nuggets of wisdom to our parents and to young adults who are considering God's call in their life. So thanks so much for being with us, Jonathan.
Absolutely. You know what? I've from day one, what a kinship with the Highlands, man. It's like, church is not a location. It's not a building. It's not an event. It's a people. And man, when you connect with people where there's that kinship and you go, oof, these are my people, the Highlands, you guys you got it going on. And I know it's not just about doing the ministry. It's about living it out. And so, man, you guys are doing it. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be partnering with you, man.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Take care. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.